Welcome back. The Manpower Ministry assures that groups currently not covered under a new workplace anti-discrimination law will still be protected. The new legislation gives greater protection to workers and job seekers on grounds such as nationality, age and sex. But while characteristics like sexual orientation and gender identity have been excluded this time round, it says it may review this in time to come. Shalentia has more.
In the Act.
It was a debate that lasted over 7 hours, spanning 2 days. Nearly 30 MPs rose to speak on the new workplace fairness legislation. Laws are aimed to kick in next year or in 2027. Another related bill is expected to be introduced later this year. All these so that job seekers and workers will get greater protection against discrimination. Manpower Minister See Leng has promised that suggestions from members of the House will be considered in time to come.
We all recognize that this is a landmark bill, but this is just the start. We are all balancing many considerations across multiple stakeholders, but rest assured, we will continue to work on it, and with all of your support, with all of your feedback, with all of your suggestions, we take it on board. We will work on it and we will improve over time.
Several opposition MPs had asked why the process took so long after it was first mooted in 2021. Dr. Tan explained that the government took a prudent and measured approach in designing the bill to ensure balance and social harmony between employers and employees. The bill sets out how job seekers and workers cannot be discriminated against based on characteristics such as age, nationality and sex. Several MPs also called for the inclusion of sexual orientation and gender identity. But Dr. Tan emphasized that all workplace discrimination, including towards LGBTQ+ individuals, will not be tolerated, although such issues remain complex.
We have built up expertise in handling that 11 protected characteristics. We hope to be able to come to speed to also manage other characteristics. And in time to come, if we are able to reach a level where we are comfortable with, and also in terms of societal norms, right? We are always a work in progress, and we will always want to improve our system.
Other MPs also suggested that the protection be applied to platform and outsourced workers. While they're not covered under the bill, Dr. Tan says that the Tripartite Guidelines on Fair Employment Practices, or TGFEP, will be updated, and relevant action will be taken for discriminatory acts involving them. The issue of reasonable accommodations for persons with disabilities was also raised, with suggestions to include these in the bill. While Dr. Tan recognized the importance of these appropriate modifications in the workplace, he says the priority is to first strengthen understanding and support among employers.
Rather than, as of the outset, mandating employers to provide reasonable accommodations, we have embarked on an education-first approach via the upcoming Tripartite Advisory. We want to be able to shift and ultimately change mindsets and to mainstream the concept of reasonable accommodations in the employment space first. Guiding employers and employees to discuss accommodations that would suit their specific work context.
He also assured members that all firms will still be taken to task if they discriminate against workers. Currently, small firms with fewer than 25 employees are exempted from the bill to allow them time and resources to prepare for legislation. But Dr. Tan says that they will still be held liable under the TGFEP, and the exemption will be reviewed 5 years after the new laws kick in.
Well, we want to stay with this topic, and for that, we have Manpower Minister See Leng joining me right here in the studio tonight. Minister, I hear you. I hear that this is a starting point, and I hear that there needs to be a certain amount of education, to catch people up on this. But you also know that some MPs have been saying that the new law, the list included in it, doesn't include every form of discrimination and might leave some out. And the question they ask is, hey, why not do this quickly now? Why not encompass it all now rather than in the future and perhaps even, avoid questions of moving the goalpost?
Well, thank you. I think first and foremost, this is really a very momentous landmark for us. And obviously the intent, the aspiration is you can do a lot more. But how we pick the protected characteristics, and by the way, jurisdictions all over the world also have a defined list of protected characteristics. I think the key thing is that what is the length of that list itself. So what we have done is to take the list of protected characteristics that we've been working with today that covers 95% of the complaints that we deal with, that we are sure-footed, that we are prudent on first. And our model itself is actually quite unique because we are still keeping the tripartite guidelines on fair employment practices and TAFEP. So with that, it supports and it builds, WFL builds upon what TAFEP has achieved all these years.
Okay, I understand. So what if somebody comes to you or somebody comes to MOM and says, I have a grievance, I've experienced some discrimination. What kind of help can companies get from MOM to set up proper grievance handling procedures? And how can MOM ensure that, there's no retaliation against those that come forward and complain about that discrimination?
Yeah. So the key component, I think you've broadly articulated it. So maybe the sequencing is such that each time a complaint is brought up to it, we would encourage the individual to have to go through that mandated grievance handling within the company itself. So they should be able to have an open, trusting communication where they can then articulate what was that grievance all about, what was the discrimination all about. Now, failing which, if the company's internal process cannot work, then they have to go for mediation. And again, it's mandated. It's only at the last resort, which we hope that only a very small trickle will come through. They'll go through this adjudication. Now, TAFEP today already has a one-stop resource sort of handbook for companies to adopt. On top of that, we will be setting up, sort of an e-portal to enable and a course in terms of learning, acquisition of the knowledge by these small companies so that they can quickly bring themselves up to speed with grievance handling. And the second portion of it is that there is the confidentiality and also protection from retaliation. So all the employees have to do, if they encounter such an issue, bring it up to the company's internal processes. They are protected from retaliation. They can actually make and bring up that grievance in a safe, protected environment.
Because I believe many of these cases originate from issues of miscommunication, which perhaps do not need to reach that third level.
You are absolutely correct. And the vast majority, a lot of it is understanding. Each site have their own needs, and for them to come together to understand the needs, the limitations, and the expectations of the other side, I think it's actually quite important.
Yeah. Help us to understand also small companies which do have many high cases of discrimination, yet they are being exempted from this law for the next 5 years at least. For those who have fewer than 25 employees, why?
We are giving them this period of exemption to allow them a runway to build up their own capabilities. Now, this does not mean that they can rest on the laurel because the TGFEP can still catch them if they discriminate. But during this particular process, we will actively help them to acquire the necessary sort of processes, develop it in-house for grievance handling, develop the ability to actually manage some of the needs and requirements of the employees, what is the impact in terms of mediation, right? So that they actually get themselves up to speed. Now, fundamentally, discrimination in all cultures is a mindset issue. What we're trying to do is to also help to educate them in terms of nudging them to, improve their mindsets, change their mindsets. And even for the bigger companies that are not exempted today, our approach is still education first, right? It's only the really egregious cases, then we go after them, by administrative penalties or civil penalties.
So the longer runway for the smaller companies, because they might not have a dedicated department or resources.
Yes.
Okay. The other group I wanted to ask you about was platform workers. Again, they all seem to be playing catch up in some ways, so they're not in this included. Can you share the rationale for excluding this group of people?
Well, today we passed the bill last year.
Yeah.
It was just actually quite recent as well. Now, today, in terms of the contract of service, and for them, in a way, together with the outsourced workers and others, what we are reassuring them is that all of their cases of discrimination is still covered under TAFEP. So they can bring, but they can bring the grievance to TAFEP itself, which will also work with their unions if they are unionized, because they can now get representation to address some of these complaints. But I think in time to come, because of what we are also acquiring in terms of the experience, in terms of the expertise and competence, we will gradually see how we can help protect them even more. But at this particular point in time, as I've always come back to first principles, we wanted to make sure that we start on a sure footing. We wanted to be prudent. And I mean, to come up with a law today that covers up to now 95% of the discrimination complaints, I think it's not that far off, Now, whether we want to really go after that perfection, we also should not allow that perfection to be the enemy of the good.
Yeah.
I think that is something that we have at the back of our mind all the time. And this is an inflection point. We feel that we are ready to launch this. And then following that, there'll be a second bill to be passed sometime in the second half of this year itself, which will then put out all the administrative and civil penalties and so on, and what kind of recourse and remedies and so on. I think by the time it's ready, we would have also worked on, improving TGFEP, TAFEP, so that as an ecosystem, the entire workforce can be supported adequately.
Okay. One last question. You talked about our bill, our law being comparable to other countries. Can you elaborate a bit about that? How does this law stack up against other countries?
Well, in terms of the protected characteristics, and that was my point, all jurisdictions have protected characteristics, so that otherwise it can be an open-ended type of law itself, which is very difficult to enforce, right? Yeah. So because of the fact that it's scoped out clearly, for us, our model of having the WFL with a list of protected characteristics is actually quite similar to other jurisdictions. Now, where the differences are is the list of protected characteristics. In some jurisdictions, we've got certain characteristics that is aligned. In some of them, no.
But give me an example.
What is unique? Well, examples are like what we debated today extensively in Parliament, and that is on indirect discrimination, right? But what is actually unique today, Jill, is that from our understanding and our knowledge, we are probably one of the few jurisdictions, or maybe even the one, that has WFL, the new legislation, sitting on top of the TGFEP, the tripartite and TAFEP itself. So it is a sort of a two-in-one kind of entity itself. Now, for those countries that have indirect discrimination as a protected characteristic, we actually studied that model quite carefully. We found that actually it is very difficult for them to prove. And what we are trying to also do is, as we launch this, the last thing we want is that within a year of launching, we get inundated with a lot of litigious claims and litigation and so on, right?
Yes.
Then I think it's going to actually set us backwards.
It could become quite a lawyered area and overwhelming for the company itself. Okay, so I do want to thank you for clarifying a few of those points for us here and coming into the studio and speaking with us.
Thank you.
I've been speaking there with Manpower Minister Tan See Leng on the new workplace fairness legislation.